Hello, everybody. Welcome back to my 12 Rules for Life series. If you haven't seen the other episodes, basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to take each of Jordan Peterson's 12 rules, summarize them, and then give my thoughts on them. Rule 5 is do not let your children do anything that makes you dislike them. Peterson's key argument in this chapter is that being a successful parent pretty much boils down to making your kid socially acceptable, which may sound kind of cruel and weird at first, but he argues that by doing this, you're giving your kid the best chance possible to succeed in the future. And he says if you don't teach your kid these important lessons, then the world will teach it to them in a much more cruel way. Peterson argues that society does not make children evil. Children are not inherently pure. He mentions how our ancestors, the apes, are, even without any human interaction, even without ever seeing humans, they are just naturally have violent tendencies. So Peterson actually argues that society brings order to children. It makes them better. It does not make them more evil. Peterson says kids at this age, they don't know any better, so they need to test and see what works. And your goal as a parent is to pretty much say, this is what you should do, this is what you should not do. This is what is acceptable, this is what is not acceptable. He also mentions how some parents don't want to discipline their kids because they're afraid that their kids will start to hate them. And he argues this is actually unfair because this will hurt their long-term development way more than it'll hurt your short-term feelings. So, for example, if you don't teach your kid how to share, because when you try to tell him, hey, you should share that, he gets mad at you and he starts crying, then he's going to go off in the world and he's going to have a hard time socializing because people don't want to be with people who can't share. Peterson talks about some principles for parents to follow with their kids in this chapter. The first one is to limit the rules as much as possible. If they do something wrong, then you correct it, but otherwise, they're good. Number 2 is to use as little force as possible. Sometimes this means a timeout. Sometimes this might mean like a flick on the wrist. Sometimes this might mean some stern words. This is one of Peterson's more controversial takes, and there's some funny clips of him saying some out of context stuff about he's like, yeah, the other day I just whacked this kid on the head.
One of them came up to me today and I whacked him on the side of the head.
One of Peterson's key arguments is that not all force is equal. I certainly don't think Peterson is saying to beat your kids. I don't think he would ever recommend that. He's a psychologist. I think he would know better. But what he is saying is use the right tool for the right situation, I think. If your kid really messes up, I'm pretty sure the example he uses is like your kid runs off in the middle of a grocery store parking lot. You need to show them that that is wrong. And sometimes, he argues, that might mean giving them one of these and some stern words. And he counters the people who say, oh, I would never hurt my kids. I would never touch my kids, by saying that magnitude matters a lot. Like I said before, he's definitely not saying beat your kids, but he does say that, giving them a flick, that is okay. Whether I agree with that or not, I don't know because I don't have experience dealing with children. Peterson's third principle is that parents should come in pairs. He argues parenting is obviously a lot of work and it's hard, and it's very helpful to have sort of a proofreader in that sense to make sure they catch the things you don't, or you guys can switch off and take breaks. I realize I sound a lot like a Jordan Peterson meat writer in this series, but I don't think that there's any less value in a single mother or single father, and of course there's situational dependence, and I would agree that it's usually easier to raise a kid with two parents as opposed to one, but of course there's situational dependence, right? Sometimes it may simply just be better to have a single parent. And I don't think it's Peterson's intent to say, single parents are worse or inferior as people to, I guess you'd call it, two parents? Two parents. But I think he is saying that generally, yes, it is easy to raise a kid with help. Peterson's fourth guideline is that everyone has a capacity for evil. Even parents can start to hate their own kids. And he says, some people might say, oh, that's impossible. Like, I love my kids so much, that could never happen. But when they do things that you dislike and you don't try to fix that, he argues, pretty much you're just going to subtly get annoyed at them with time. And then eventually they'll start doing things like showing you affection. And you're just going to be like, okay, whatever. Because he says you're embarrassed by them. Back to the grocery store example. If your kid runs off in the middle of the street in the grocery store, you're probably thinking you're worrying about like, oh, what do all these other people think of me? Oh, they're gonna think I'm such a bad parent. Oh, this is so annoying, yada yada. But if you can teach your kid to just not run off in the middle of the street, well, hey, everyone gets along, right? And this is why you need to discipline your kids, because not only are you hurting their future by not teaching them what's socially acceptable, but you're literally hurting your relationship with them. And it's just not fair to the kid to have their future pretty much, I don't want to say ruined, but drastically altered because they weren't raised right. And I even noticed myself doing this with my dogs sometimes. My dogs have like spasms whenever they see anything outside. They start going crazy. They start barking, and I'm thinking, oh, like this is so annoying. The neighbors must be so annoyed. And then what do they do? What do I do when they come up to me later? I just brush them aside. I don't pet them. I don't give them any affection because I'm annoyed at them. But what should I actually do? I should teach them to not bark at everything, so then I would have no reason to be annoyed with them. Peterson's fifth guideline is to be a merciful proxy of the world. Your goal as a parent is to pretty much teach your kid, generally, what the world will be like. And he adds mercifully for a reason, because you are going to have to accept that your kid is going to do things you don't like, and you're going to get annoyed, and all this bad stuff is going to happen. It's not going to be amazing. It's not going to be perfect. But you have to show them the skills they need to thrive in the real world. Otherwise, like I said before, Peterson argues, the world is going to teach it to them in a much crueler way. I certainly thought this was a pretty interesting chapter, but I hope I really don't have to use these teachings for a good long time. It is not time to be a parent right now. On that note, have a good day, you guys.